Hi guys, and welcome back to the studio. My name is Sammy, and today I want to share with you the behind the scenes of illustrating my very first children's book. I have had a dream of illustrating a children's book for a really long time. Pretty much my whole entire life I've wanted to write a book, whether that be a romantic comedy or like a mystery or a children's book. And while that dream is still out there, I got to dip my toes into it a little bit because an author reached out to me to commission me to illustrate her children's book. And so part of that dream is becoming a reality this year. So I started the book at the very beginning of the year. Actually, it was like a couple days before New Year's Eve when she first reached out. So we got sort of like for sure on the details as far as like the contract and all that sort of stuff first week in January. So I started off the year on a really grateful and really good foot. So for those of you who don't know me, just a little bit of background. I started painting seriously in 2022, and I first started painting mostly flowers, and that is still something that I really love doing so much. It just gives me a lot of like freedom and creativity, and there's not like, flowers and nature are very forgiving in terms of like, it doesn't have to look exactly like the reference photo, or it doesn't have to look like, if you want to change the color or put something somewhere else, like that's fine because it's nature and it can do that. And I really love the like freedom and imagination of painting, flowers and stuff, but I've started painting landscapes more too. And so I really loved doing that. So I started mainly painting acrylic. I did a whole collection of roses, and then after that I sort of started dabbling in watercolor. So those are my two main mediums, and I did a collection of watercolor bows, and then I did a whole collection of hydrangeas, and that was sort of like the sparking of so much joy. So hydrangeas has kind of become like my thing. I just love painting them so much. So last summer I did a whole collection that incorporated hydrangeas, and my sort of like, I don't know, it just expanded on it to be more, there was like a still life and there was a landscape, and there, it was just a little bit more, I guess, than just the flower. And so that was extremely fun. And since then, I've just been kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but like honing my skills, I guess, as an artist in both mediums, watercolor and acrylic painting. And so that's just a little bit of background. Let me know if you have any questions about anything in the comments, but this video, I want to give you my, I guess, like 7 or 8 steps of how I illustrated this children's book. Not counting actually getting the job, step 1 was communicating really well with the author and doing sort of like a brainstorming situation. This story is actually a poem that the author wrote, and it's very personal to her. And so I really wanted, or we kind of agreed, that the inspiration for the setting and the characters would be her family and her farm and homestead. So the first step was really gathering all those images, asking her for like different questions, and her kind of like really giving me the vibes and like aesthetic that she was going for. And we talked very lengthy about the different things that inspired her in terms of like what other kind of children's books and art styles really spoke to her. And I explained, which I can go into more detail in another video about this, but I explained how artists have sort of like their own fingerprint when it comes to their art. Initially she was giving me like, I really like this art, I really like this artist's work, I really like this, which is really helpful in terms of like giving out like, oh, this is what she expects. But artists that are both good and respectable do not copy other artists' work. I mean, when you're very first beginning, I think it's okay to copy in terms of like learning, but not in terms of selling. And I don't know, that could be controversial or you can disagree, but I just really feel like, I mean, of course you can take inspiration from, but there's a fine line there. So anyway, she was giving me that, which was helpful again in terms of like getting the vibes and the aesthetic that she was going for, and sort of like, I don't know like exactly how to describe it, but just like understanding, because a lot of the time, if you're not an artist, it's really hard to describe what you want as a client or what you are expecting the art to look like. I found that as an artist, I can see things really clearly that maybe the client can't visualize as well. And so so gathering that inspiration and sort of like gathering her expectations was really helpful. And I explained how my style would come through, and of course she understood that, agreed, loved it. And then we talked about, she sent me photos of her family, and we talked about which ones we liked and the inspiration of like what kind of things we wanted on each page and things like that. And then I asked her to break down the poem as far as like which words she would like on each page. So initially it was just broken down in stanzas, and I'm really lucky because the author was extremely collaborative. She involved me pretty much every step of the way, and I'm really lucky because I know that's not always the case, but because she's self-published and because she's a nice person, I think it really worked out, and I was able to, give my opinion when she asked for it, which was pretty often, and way more than she really had to. And I'm really grateful because this project started, as soon as I read the poem, it just meant a lot to me because it's such a beautiful poem, and I was honestly really touched and honored that I got to be a part of it. So basically, to round that out, step 1 was brainstorming and getting to know the expectations. Step 2 was laying it all out. I broke it down for like how many full page spreads or like illustrations she would want, how many like double page illustrations she would want, and then like what would go on the pages that had the words. So I have a visual for you here. This is a little bit later down the line, but this will give you an idea of what that looked like. I ended up adding details in a little bit later, but basically it looked like this, where I had like, I broke down like the cover, you'd probably want a like a dedication and copyright and that sort of stuff, and a title page. And then I broke down, like when she gave me the lines, that it'd be it'd be words on one page and then a full page illustration, and then maybe like a little icon, a little smaller illustration. And that would be for each thing, except there would be one double page where the words would be on the illustration. And then I sent that to her to get approved. And so that was step 2. That was kind of an easy step, just kind of like getting it all out there so we had something visual to look at, and also something like that we could reference to each other when we were speaking about each page. Like we could talk about page 2, or we can talk about page 5. And so that just made it easy, at least as a visual person, for me to see where we were at and see kind of like what tasks needed to be done, and like sort of just see it all out on one page. That was just really helpful for me. It was a simple step, but a really impactful one for me. The 3rd step was probably the lengthiest step for me, which was kind of getting all the ideas out on paper and making different sketches. She kind of gave me a lot of creative freedom in terms of the design and the illustrations, in terms of like what the setting was and what the scenes were for each page. And she gave me a couple of things that meant a lot to her. She gave me some background on her family and what things really meant a lot to her. And also she told me that at least on one page, she wanted it to be all 4, her 2 kids, her, and her husband. So that ended up actually happening on 2 pages, which was cool. So it was really nice to be able to sort of be inspired by her pictures that she had sent and what really spoke to me, and then sort of like get her feedback. It also kind of gave me a lot of free range. So it gave me sort of like, I had to really hone in on what mattered and what I thought was the best way to go. And luckily, most of the time we really agreed. So that was really nice. I know it's not always the case with commissions, but a lot of the time she was just happy with what I presented, and she'll have some corrections or some things like, oh, this would be better than this, and based on something that meant something to her. And so it was very collaborative and very good. So the process of sketching, I honestly learned so much. I mean, I think that going forward, I would do it differently, because I spent a lot of time on my iPad trying to sketch things out, and I wanted to do it there because I didn't want a lot of like wasted paper, or, I knew that I can't do all like the idea sketching on the actual watercolor paper, because you just can't erase that much on watercolor paper. And I just didn't want like all the pencil lines to show and all that sort of stuff. And so I knew that like going from basically square one and like no real idea to like developing the idea needed to happen on separate paper. So I did it on my iPad. I think in the future I might do like a little bit more on paper. I just think that for me, like, I don't know. I just think for me that is better, only because I'm a little bit more comfortable sketching with a pencil. I just feel like I don't know how to describe it, but I just feel like I have a little more control over like the tiny, tiny details with my pencil. And I think it's because, like, honestly, the tip of an iPad pencil is like, so it's like a little bit so much thicker than a regular pencil that I think that really matters when you're doing such like tiny details. At least it did for me. A brief interruption from editing Sammy. I feel like I really did not describe why I did not like the iPad versus using my pencil for the color, like the sketching part. I think I was trying to say the wrong thing. Like, really, I just think like the iPad is good for getting like the basic layout. That's great. But then to try to spend so much time doing the details was a little bit superfluous when I was going to have to sketch it out on paper anyways. And that is what I meant. And I think I went overboard in explaining it. So I don't think I was very clear. That's what I meant. I do think that in the future I would do like iPad for layout, separate paper for getting like the sketching and the details, and then put it on watercolor paper. So that's sort of like what I've learned from the process. All that to say, I spent a long time trying to make these sketches, and so basically I printed out something that was on my iPad, so I kind of made like the area the size that the book would be, and then I did like, this is a more detailed version, but still very rough. But I sort of laid out the way the page would look, and I told her, you know, this is a rough sketch, this is sort of what I'm thinking, what are your thoughts? And I sent it to her, and then she would give feedback. Like on one of the sketches, I did like a nighttime scene, and I had 2 twin beds because she has 2 sons in the bedroom, and she didn't love that because they don't have that in their house, and she kind of just wanted something a little bit more, she just didn't like it. So, and that's fine. So I just reduced it to one bed, and I put a chair instead of a bed that she was holding the other baby, and so it worked out fine. But she just, you know, sometimes gave some feedback, and so then it was easier for me to change. That was one thing I did like about the iPad, was like I could just keep certain elements and then, you know, rearrange instead of having to like redraw or like erase. But again, a learning experience that I think I'll change my methods a little bit in the future, but this is my first children's book, so of course I have relearning experiences, and it was a lot of fun to just like imagine and sort of just like be in that space to try to like figure out how these words translate into pictures that are meaningful and like send the same message, because the words don't necessarily say, you know, they're having cereal this morning. It just, you know, it was more of like, I should have probably started with this, but the book is about how it's called A Place for Everything, and it's sort of about how in the phase of life whenever you're a mom with young kids, everything is kind of everywhere, and that's the place for it at that time. And even though you might wish that it would be like tidier, or, you know, they wouldn't be so sticky or things like that, that time is so sacred and so special, and it's kind of just about cherishing that time and how that everywhere is a place for everything in that phase of life, and sometime later in life there will be a place for everything, and in some ways you might miss the mess. And so that's sort of the theme of the book. And so with that in mind, that is how I sort of created each illustration, and then decided what the setting would be. And honestly, like, the words sometimes dictated that, but oftentimes it was just her imagery. And then I felt like, I think what drove my inspiration was her the pictures that she sent, the ones that inspired me the most. I sort of initially thought of a scene, and then I sort of just like sat with it and thought where it would fit best in the story, or if it would fit best certain places, and I think that worked really well. She also gave me like some keywords and things that she specifically definitely wanted in the book. Like, there's a teacup that's very special and sentimental to her from her grandmother that actually broke, and so she definitely wanted that in the book to sort of memorialize it. So I made sure to include that in at least one spot, but actually ended up making a second appearance. And so just little things like that that she sort of mentioned that I made sure to include on each page. And also something extremely fun that I included on every page, which we sort of decided together. She mentioned something like she really wanted to do a look and find. And also she mentioned that they have baby chicks. That's definitely part of their story. And so I was like, well, how fun would it be if I hid a few chicks on each page? So on each page, there's some little baby chicks to find, and not always the same number, but always a few to find. So I mean, sometimes they're, most of the time they're pretty easy to find. So for kids, I think it'll be fun. Occasionally there's a little tricky one, so, but that's just something fun that we decided to include in the book to make it a little bit more interactive for kids and just like, you know, to add a little touch of whimsy. That was probably my favorite thing about the book, actually. Something to keep in mind whenever you're illustrating a children's book is the cut lines. So the gutter, which is like exactly in the middle of the book, and then the bleed line, which is like the end of the pages. You have to make sure there are no very important details, but that space is covered, because that gives room for, you know, however it gets stitched together and also cut, that there isn't going to be white space, but that also there's nothing that you really love that's going to be cut off. And so that was a learning experience as well. But luckily she had a formatter that really dealt with that mostly, but it was something that I learned more about as I move forward in my illustrating journey. So after I got all of my ideas approved, which was the kind of like iPad phase, I moved into step 4, which was sketching on the actual paper. I would kind of get a rough sketch, like just the shapes, and then I would go in right before painting and get all the details and then erase the graphite. I didn't do every single illustration all at once, but I did maybe like 3 or 4 of them at once. In this phase, I really honed in on everything that was actually going to be in the painting. And so, for example, this is actually the first page. And so you can see in the background, so there's actually like 2 garden beds, which maybe isn't the exact layout of their garden, but is accurate to their garden. They have more than one garden bed. But as I started sketching it out on the watercolor paper, I sort of got to see how it would be a little busier than I think I really wanted it to look. I didn't want this character to get lost in all that was happening in the vegetable garden, and so I decided to take that out. And in that phase, I also did some practices. So I practiced with pen, and I practiced without pen, and I practiced other little motions and positions and postures and all that sort of stuff. Just some little practices. And here's the other character on that same page. Just some practices with and without pen. This is like practicing very teeny with eyes. Just like different little practices, because like I said, before this project, my main focus was mainly flowers and landscapes. So this is my way of kind of giving myself no pressure and just sort of like practicing different styles and what we wanted it to look like, whether we wanted it to have the pen sketch or no pen. And I decided not to use the pen for this project, and mainly because I really loved how this one turned out. And so because of that, I just used that sort of as my inspiration. And keeping in mind that I didn't do the pen and I took out that second garden bed, this is how the first page turned out. I really, really love how it turned out. I love the garden and the little chick. I really love how this little strawberry truck turned out. Also obsessed with this, with the little drips and the 2 popsicles, and I don't know, I'm really proud of how it turned out. So this was the first page I did, and the first page in the book. And at the end, I want to show you how the cover turned out. But that's how the first page turned out, and that was basically my process. Sketch, refine, erase graphite, paint. So step 5, after, step 4 I said was sketching. Step 5 obviously was painting. And then, and I did all watercolor for all of these, apart from, I used a small amount of white gouache to get some of those white details back to bring them a little more forward. But majorly, this was mostly watercolor. So step 5 was painting. And then step 6 was getting approval, which happened kind of like intermittently between project, like every time I finished something, or once I finished like 3 or so, I would send her some pictures and she would give me feedback. And most of the time it was, I love everything, but can you change one thing? And most of the time I could go in real quick and, like, for example, with the first illustration, she said, I know in the photos it looks like he's really blonde, but actually his hair is a little bit more sandy, so I made his hair a little bit darker. And I tried to keep that in mind as I went through the rest of the book. So those were pretty easy things to change. Making things darker in watercolor is a lot easier than making them lighter, but so that was great. And then the other little changes that she had, if they were like something that couldn't really be erased, because you know that's how watercolor is, then after the illustrations were scanned in to make the file to send to her, I would go in and make those little corrections with my iPad. So it wasn't too complicated to get that done, because mostly because her feedback was very positive, and usually something that was not too terribly difficult to correct. So step 6 was getting approval and making corrections. And then step 7 was painting all the icon pages. So remember I told you earlier that on the layout I had a full page illustration, and then where the words were, unless it was the double page, there was going to be a little icon illustration. So instead of having just a blank page, we wanted something that was visually interesting on the words page as well. And so for that, I painted just little icons. So like, and I actually think this is in order, so sneak preview. I have a tomato plant that goes with the garden scene, some apple pie jam and an apple, some blocks, some cars, and this goes with the words for that page because I think something about tripping on cars. This is my favorite icon page. And the words go in the center of the circle, so I just love how that turned out. Favorite. A rubber ducky. A purple butterfly. A pair of flashlights, and a hot air balloon. So that was the next step, just painting all those. And I guess, I don't know if that's really necessarily another step versus the other painting, so maybe we should just include that with step 5 with painting. So then the next step, I guess we're on step 7, was scanning everything in. For the cover and for the double page, the paper was actually quite large, and so I had to get that photographed separately from a local place that does all of my large scale scans. And all of the other pages, the full page illustrations and the icon pages, I just scanned in at a high resolution, a high DPI, and then I went in and edited anything that needed to be changed. So any corrections that she had that couldn't be done easily with watercolor, or anything, like if there were any fibers or any extra like little, you know, particles that came on the scanner, I edited all those out. And then I submitted all of the files to her for printing. So that was really the end of my part of the project in terms of like the tasks that I had to complete. However, step 8 was collaborating and sharing ideas, because there were a few things that still needed to be decided about the printing of the book. For example, end pages and title page. Those were things that were not part of the initial contract. And so I shared ideas with her of ways that she could use the art that was already submitted and make something really, really cool with it. And so that was really fun to collaborate with her on that. And then also she just asked my opinion about certain things throughout the end part of the project. So that was just really kind of her to include me in the whole entire process. So I'm really excited to get the book in my hands. I think it'll be probably the second week in May, maybe, that I'll have the book. And so I'll be really excited to share that with you guys when it comes. But I hope that I explained that well. Again, this is my first time illustrating a children's book. So let me know if you have any questions about things I may have missed or things that you'd like me to elaborate on. I'd be more than happy to share more about the process, but I just really am so grateful, and I'm so excited to see the book, and I can't wait to share more with you about it once I get it in my hands. But as promised, I'm going to share with you the cover of the book. So I'm really, really proud of how this turned out. The way that it will go is when I hold it up, this side will be the cover, and then it'll flip around because it's a wraparound cover, and then this side will be the back. So hopefully you'll be able to see the whole thing. Let me scoot back a little. So here's the cover. I'm so excited with how it turned out, and like I said, I really can't wait to see it published. That's just going to be truly a dream come true. So stay tuned for that. It should be within the next few weeks, and I'll do a whole video once I have the book in my hand, showing you all the art and how it came to be published into a book. So let me know if you have any questions, and I want to thank you so much for watching, and I really can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye guys!